Hello, friends around the world. My name is Brandon Naber. Welcome to the Naberhood, where we have switched on, fun discussions with some of the most brilliant, successful, experienced, talented, and highly skilled sales and marketing minds on the planet from the world's fastest growing companies. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Today we have Oliver J. on the show. OJ, as they call him. OJ is the head of global sales at Asana, a $1.5 billion valuation company, a unicorn with $213 million capital raised. Prior to joining Asana, he scaled a Dropbox sales team from 20 to 100 people across multiple geographies. Dropbox IPO'd in 2018 at $9.6 billion valuation. Previously, Oliver worked at Morgan Stanley and New Enterprise Associates, NEA, where he invested and worked alongside entrepreneurs in consumer internet, clean tech, and enterprise SaaS companies. OJ is also on the board of directors for Grab, who has a $14 billion valuation and $9.1 billion capital raised. OJ earned his BA from the University of Pennsylvania and his MBA from Harvard Business School. Here we go. Oliver J., awesome to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here, Brandon.
Excellent. Thank you. It's July 4th. I'm sure you don't have anything better to do, so I'm really glad that you're spending it with me this morning, and I really appreciate your time. So we've got a lot to talk about. We're lucky enough to know each other personally and professionally. So I get to talk about some of my favorite things and hear about your story personally. And we'll hop into professional as well, hop through some of your career journey, and ultimately spend the bulk of our time in your professional journey talking about a lot of the strengths, experiences, and ultimately superpowers that you've built up over time that you've been able to, study about, but also execute on at several different really, really high growth businesses. So let's start on the personal side. A little bit about you growing up, a little bit about what you were like as a kid. I mean, Hong Kong, Concord, New Hampshire, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, San Francisco, Sydney, San Francisco 2.0, been all over the planet. And I'd love to walk through you as a kiddo and talk about some of your interests, some of the things you're interested in, and then your journey through school. And then we can get into professional stuff. Maybe in like 5 to 7 minutes, let's talk through the what was OJ like as a kid?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Hong Kong. My parents are still there. And I think even as a child, I was the Lego kid. I was like the builder kid. I was a total nerd throughout, and I excelled in math and science. Surprise! And then I got to the point where my parents were like, "Okay, math is only going to get you so much here," and so they then sent me to boarding school in New Hampshire.
And that's St. Paul's.
And that would be St. Paul's.
All right.
So I went there. That was my entry to the U.S. was 9th grade.
Nice. Excellent. So what were some of the interests you had or the hobbies you had when you were a kid?
My main thing was tennis. Tennis was my major hobby growing up. And I think a lot of who I am came from just that sport. Because that sport it just requires, like any sport, to be excellent. You just have to continue to grind away. So a lot of how I think actually came from that sport, competing, learning how to lose graciously, learning how to stay calm when things are looking rough, when you're down a set, what do you do? Thinking about how do you change your tactics in real time. That all comes from tennis.
Absolutely. Especially in individual sport, we have to be so iterative where you do things 1,000 times to, in practice, and it just becomes a transaction when you're in the actual match. That makes a lot of sense. So when you moved to St. Paul's and you were in Concord, New Hampshire, out of your comfort zone, tell us about that transition, and then let's talk about some of the things that you were interested in when you were in New Hampshire in high school.
Boy, it's the interesting thing was St. Paul's was is one of the top high schools in the U.S. And that's pretty much all my parents knew. And my parents said, you're very strong in math and science, but your English sucks. and it's just really bad. Um, and they're like, we need to supercharge that. And so they looked at the list. I think it's like a U.S. News and World Report list, and I had a couple rankings, and some of the names that people have heard of, Exeter, right, St. Paul's, whatever. And then so I was like, okay, I applied and got in. And I mean, St. Paul's is a real school in that it's like academics is intense, and it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you're literally in the woods. I grew up in Hong Kong. Like I grew up like in the heart of a jungle, a concrete jungle, and then I literally moved into a jungle. It was like more tree. Like there's like it's like the school had like I think like 200 acres, and I mean it was nuts. But I learned to adapt. I learned about the American way. I learned about it was tough, but it was certainly also the best 4 years of my academic career.
Nice. Very cool. And did you play tennis when you were there, or what were some of the activities that you were doing?
Yeah. I was on a tennis team. I captained a tennis team there. We were decent. I did that, and then I was just lots of clubs. But honestly, like high school was tough for me. I didn't have that much spare time. Look, as a nice. Obviously it should be clear now I have tiger parents, right? Obvious. So I did play the violin as well, but I was terrible at it. But I still stuck it through. So I did the orchestra thing, but I was so bad. But I survived, and I was okay. But I mean, I worked so hard because my English level was far behind my peers at school.
That must have been so challenging, learning all that curriculum at such a high level while you're learning how to master the English language yourself. That is immensely complex.
It was crazy. But it changed my life because when I went to college, I studied like philosophy, politics, and economics. I went to Penn, right? So I didn't go to Wharton and just do a bunch of math and talk about strategy. I mean, it's funny. I'm in business now. It's so easy compared to like a career where you're, or studying like old philosophy texts and debating and like writing papers on why you disagree with Socrates. I mean, that's like, but if I didn't go to St. Paul's and then forced out of my comfort zone, I wouldn't have done that.
That's cool. That's actually a really good way of looking at it. My most challenging class I think I've ever had in uni was my logic class, my philosophy class, like deductive reasoning and logic and going through all those different frameworks and squaring everyone from old philosophers and folks that it just almost feels like it's impossible with their life experiences to contend and debate with. But that's really interesting. You moved to UPenn. Why did you decide to choose UPenn?
Actually, it was specifically because I really liked this program. So PPE, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, is the most popular major in Oxford in the UK.
Interesting.
And it's Penn was, I think, one of two schools that adopted this program. So it sounds fancy. Like sometimes when I tell people that, it sounds like I tri-majored. It's not true. It's more than one, but it's this integrated curriculum of three disciplines that I think are really, really tied together. And so that's why I went to Penn for that program specifically. Got it.
So I won't tell anyone you didn't try major, but it sounds really, really, really stimulating. So you were at UPenn. What were some of the things you're interested in at UPenn before we get into your first job?
Penn was, like I said, St. Paul's really opened my eyes to the world of humanities. And that's why I really loved that. And so my interest had always been in business. Like you grow up in Hong Kong, you're going to be in business or you're a doctor, right? It's like, or maybe a lawyer. It's like, it's what you do, and it's in my blood. And so even when I was in high school, I was like reading like Peter Lynch books on like how to invest. I've always been interested in business, but I took a couple of business classes and I was like, especially the management ones, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not gonna pay this kind of tuition to learn how to like work as a team. Not to dismiss it, but I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna have a chance again to read about Immanuel Kant and how he thinks about the world. So in college, what I did was I spent most of my time academically on humanities, And then extracurricular, it was where I got kind of scratched my itch on business. Biggest thing there is I started the Wharton China Business Society. And back then in the early, it was like 2000, right? China had just gotten into the World Trade Organization. This was before China is the China we know it is today. But it's going to be big, and so we did a lot of that, and it's cool. That society is still running now.
Wow,
I get a lot of my emails. Well, they keep asking me for donations. So that's why I know it's still going.
that's how you know you made it. That's how you know you made it. All right, cool. So you go through your pen. You try major, obviously. We talked about that. And you're interested also in studying business. I know you've always been interested in studying companies. I don't know if that's at a cost of studying people, but I know you've always been interested in studying companies. Is that when that started? Or did you get more practical with investing at Morgan Stanley, at NEA, at Harvard, before you started studying companies a lot?
I think the turning point was Morgan Stanley. Well, I was probably the internship before that summer internship. I think I just found it really fascinating, right? So when I got to Morgan Stanley, and I picked Morgan Stanley because I always like tech as well. So I've always been a geeky, nerdy guy, and so Morgan Stanley said you're going to join a tech team, and I ended up joining the team that covered hardware. So companies like Cisco, Juniper, and then all the companies that died, Nokia, Motorola, like they don't exist anymore, Nortel. But I just found it so fascinating to think about how a lot of these companies basically sell commodity hardware. Like a Cisco router is not that much better than Juniper router.
Right.
Or vice versa back then at that point. But
it's like a nightmare for software. Yes. I mean, you're selling on features and pricing.
Exactly. But you were able to see very, very different trajectories, right? A lot of these companies no longer exist. A lot of them are still strong today. And that's just because of like a different strategy that companies took.
Yep.
And I had the opportunity to go really deep. So that's why I joined equity research as opposed to a lot of my colleagues that joined investment banking to work on like IPOs and deals, because it's probably the humanities background and education that I had led me to want to dig in deep as opposed to more of a transactional finance job. And that's why I ended up in equity research. And through that experience, I've really got to learn how to dig into companies.
Yeah, very cool. So, that's great transition. So while you're at Morgan Stanley, what's the top thing you learned from Morgan Stanley, the top learning you had before you moved into NEA? And then we'll hop into NEA after that.
Ooh, top thing from Morgan Stanley. I got two things in my mind. So can I give you two?
Give me 10 if you want to. I got time.
Yeah. So the first is, I think of all places, I was extremely fortunate, and I had two great managers at Morgan Stanley. They're my first bosses, and they say like, your first manager really impacts, you and your career more than any other, right? I was just so fortunate because normally you don't get that on Wall Street.
Yeah, statistics aren't on your side.
I got placed with Scott Coleman and John Marchetti, and they were up and comers. And they rose through the ranks, and so they know what it took to move up. And they just had a very empowering mentality from the beginning. So they just pushed me, and they just kept. And I also asked for more, but they just every time they just really gave me great feedback, pushed me. I learned so much, and they empowered me so much that by the second year they put me on stage at the Morgan Stanley Tech Conference interviewing tech CEOs, and I was like, that's cool. And I think that was a very formative experience because I got to benefit from that, and I know what that did for me and my career and my confidence. And we'll talk more later about building teams and managing teams, but I've taken a lot of that philosophy from them because I was so lucky. So that would be the number one thing. I would just go there. That's my number one thing I got from Morgan Stanley.
Nice. That's great. Well, you're going to talk us through NEA. You've worked for incredible companies. So, you're on team building. Let's talk about that. Hiring great teams. One of the things that I know is your superpower from hearing from other people, from talking to you personally, from talking to you professionally, but the results speak for themselves. Like you've hired incredible individuals that I know because I've used to work with them, or I know people who used to work with them are just like the best at what they do. and you consistently do it time over time over time. What I'd love to hear is, one, like, what's that hiring philosophy that you took away from those guys, as well as, any additional things you've applied today? And then we can talk a little bit about your actual process, because clearly there's something you're doing in execution that is better than most, if not better than almost all. So what is your philosophy around hiring that you took away from those guys, as well as, how you think about it? And then we'll talk through the process, like candidate profiling strategy, how do you attract and recruit? How do you close? So we'll talk about those things as well. So
cool. Okay. Cool. I love building teams. I think it starts that way. Let me start with why I care about it. And I think for me, that's why that literally is why I think, that's where I find meaning in my life. Is
wow, that's cool.
Bringing in high potential talent and seeing it grow, and creating opportunities. And kind of, I've always thought of myself on my deathbed, if I'm seen as like the Y Combinator of talent, like I'll be really, really happy.
Love it.
And so because of that, I think that impacts what I look for, because I really look for people who I believe I can go on a journey together, and they can learn from me, I can learn from them, and we're going to achieve great things together. I think that's the highest level mentality that I have. I don't look at it, no matter how senior or whether someone's a fresh out of school graduate. I think I can learn something. If I can't learn something from you, then I don't think you're a good fit. But that's how I see it. And so it's interesting. At Asana, we recently distilled down kind of like what are our sales like attributes, the hiring profile, not profile, but like what are the attributes or values, depending on how you define it, that we look for. And I was very, very involved, you can imagine, because in many ways, I think I codified the things that I really value. So there are 4 pieces that I really care about in every single person that I hire, no matter, again, like fresh out of school, or you're the region, you're going to run EMEA, right? The first is I got like someone who like really pursues excellence. What I mean by that is I want to see evidence that someone knows what excellence means, because in high growth companies, you're growing 100%, 200% early on, 300% in the super early days. Everybody knows information is everywhere now. So you can imagine you've got great competition. And so you got to go for people who really, really, if you're not excellent, you don't even have a chance to survive. And so if you're fresh out of school and I'm digging into your profile and I don't see one thing, right? I don't care. It could be violin. If you've gotten really good at violin, I'm like, oh yeah, right? And this is sometimes why I think some of my best hires have been teachers, because gosh, if you can teach, especially like people from like Teach for America, if you can teach math to inner city kids who have no interest in math, okay, you've pursued excellence here. So someone who's just like and I think in this world you either get it or you don't. You've either seen excellence and you know what that means and what it takes to be great, or you just don't. It is very binary, and you can tell very quickly. So someone who does that is something I value a lot. The second piece is we're calling it you lead with empathy. And in sales, of course, empathy, like if you don't have empathy, you're not going to understand your customers' needs, and you're not going to relate to them. You're not going to build a good relationship with them. But I think a lot of this is also empathy just in terms of how you work together, right? Like in sales, you never win because of sales. This is a huge thing where I a lot of times I talk to other founders and they're like, oh, okay, it's time to monetize, or I need to hire some salespeople. Like those salespeople are going to fail, right? Because sales is just a part of a bigger engine, but you got to work together, and working together is freaking hard. It's really hard. Right. And so if you don't lead with empathy, you're not going to know how to work together as a cross-functionally. In sales, what do the salespeople say all the time? Every single salesperson, every single sales leader, I need more leads. Marketing's not developing more leads for me. I'm like, okay, great. Tell me more. How could they be developing more leads for you? And why? Most people can't answer that. If you can't answer that, just like with a customer, you're not going to be able to partner with marketing to generate the leads that you actually want, right? It's not a transaction. So anyways, so leading with empathy, I think is something really, really important. And really, really behind that, what I'm looking for is self-awareness, right? In a fast-growing company, you don't have the time to coach every single person. You really don't. I got some managers right now who are managing 14 people because we're just growing that fast. And I couldn't hire managers fast enough. That means that of the 14 people, honestly, they're not each individually getting the top quality mentorship that, say, I got from 2 guys at Morgan Stanley. But if I hire people who are self-aware, they're going to teach themselves. They're going to look for ways to learn. And that combined with pursuing excellence, you're going to get good people. The third piece is what I call, we someone on our team define it as called it do the hard. This is simple. This is like, you got to grind. I mean, no one has achieved excellence without grinding away. And sales is really tough. I mean, literally, it is the definition of a grinder job. But also, and this is like, do you take shortcuts? Sometimes the hard way now is actually the easy way long term. And that's what I look for. Like, are you willing to do the hard work today so that it's easier for you later? And the last thing, we call it ascending together, which is like your ability to work as on a team. It's like the thinking like an owner, right? That's something LinkedIn, I think, is one of Jeff's big thing. It's one of my big things too. I remember when I was Morgan Stanley, that's what John Mack said when he was running the company. Now, this is a big bang, Morgan Stanley. When he first said that, I was like, yeah, how am I going to change the trajectory of Morgan Stanley as a first-year analyst? But I did think that way. I really did, and I love that. So that's kind of those are some high-level qualities that I look for in anybody.
Nice, that's awesome. One follow-up on that. Do you have a particular process you go through when, like, let's talk about hiring directly on your own team, your directs. Do you have a particular process you go through around candidate profiling, attracting that candidate and you reaching out to them either personally or the message that you craft, going through the recruitment and interviewing process, and then closing? Do you have any tactics that you think completely set you apart from maybe what other people do, just based on the results that you've gotten, that they work?
No, I don't know if it's differentiated, but I'll tell you how I approach it. I think the first step is you really have to understand the nuances of the role that you're trying to hire for. This is a mistake I see a lot in companies. They say, especially early stage companies, at some point they have like 10 salespeople, they're hitting quota kind of, and they're like, okay, I need it. And then the board's like, you need a VP of sales. And then they go and then they hire bets or some kind of recruiting firm, and they load them up with like VP sales candidates, and they just hire someone to do VP sales. And there's just that happens every day. And I think there's so many nuances to the role. What kind of sales? How do you want to build it? And what types of talent would you want this person to bring in? And so I am a big believer that you don't know how to hire for that role unless you've done that job yourself. And so for at least a quarter or two, I think as you get better, you use pattern matching and shortcut. But in the beginning, you have to do it yourself. So in the sales world, so what types of companies are you really, really going after and such. And so that's my first step. It's like, I never take on even though I am desperate for bandwidth and I would just love to hire someone right now to just take the job. If I don't dig in myself, I don't think I'll hire the best person for that job. So that's first. And I think that helps a lot downstream, and I'll come back to it. Second is then I leverage my network. So I leverage my network and I go talk to people. And you and I have talked where I'm like, hey, I'm looking for this kind of person. And now I know what I'm looking for, right? Who's the best 2 people you know? And I don't need to recruit them, but I want to talk to them.
You do this a lot. You do this a lot to the point where, like, sometimes I know you're in the market for someone because I'm close with someone that might be one of the best in the market then, and I'm hearing that you've had a conversation because he or she and I will talk and hear that, oh, OJ had a conversation with what? Like you do this all the time. It is perpetual, and it is in your nature perpetual to do this, like, all the time.
And I think part of it is kind of like, I find it interesting, right? It's like you get to learn. It's like totally free education. Why not? And so I constantly do that. That's true. And then I get referrals and I get and so I I remember when I moved out to Australia to start Dropbox APAC, and back then LinkedIn, and you were there. LinkedIn was like one of the top SaaS organizations in, like I would say even higher, like smaller than Salesforce, but the talent was super high quality, right? I canvassed the top 3 layers. I talked to every single person across sales, marketing, talent solutions, like everybody. And then I kind of basically profiled, and I knew who, and that's how I met, great people like Gareth. Anyway, so that's step 2. Step 3 is then obviously, building that list and talking to people. And I think this is one where, I don't know if it's different, but I do it myself. I reach out. I mean, I'm looking for a head of BD right now. I'm the one who's like in-mailing people. I don't outsource it to a recruiter. And I think that makes a big difference, because if you're top talent, you don't want to, you want to hear from literally what you want your best shot at this person, right? So I do it myself, and I want to get in touch with these people. And I think this is where having done the job yourself for at least a quarter or 2 really, really makes a difference, because then now you can talk about the role in a much more sophisticated way. You're not like, I'm just hiring someone to run East Coast. Like, right? You want that person, like someone is interested when you're able to map the distinct qualities needed for someone to be successful in a certain role, and why that candidate is a perfect fit.
There's something ultra sexy about that. Yeah, there's something ultra sexy about that from a candidate's perspective.
Because a candidate, like, people have choices. There's so many great companies out there, but what candidates want to know ultimately, no matter where and who, is that they're going to be set up for success. And so I think that comes across when you actually know what you're looking for. And then you can talk about why that person, hey, Brandon, I'm talking to you and you specifically because of XYZ. And that XYZ is exactly what I'm looking for. And that makes it really a lot better. And then I also think a lot, again, you got to develop that relationship, especially if you're hiring general managers. Like, you need to, if you treat it as just a process, that's where I've seen these things fail. I mean, I've seen bad hiring practices even at Dropbox where you made a lot of hiring mistakes, was when you make these critical roles that you just kind of rush through a process. I'm going to go find an executive recruiter firm. They're going to bring me, 20, and then I'm going to whittle it down to 3, bring 3 people back on site, pick one. Those almost never work out because you don't have that trust that developed, or you can't close because that trust has not been built up throughout the process.
Those are great. Let's move into NEA. So you're at Morgan Stanley. You make the jump to NEA. Why do you make that jump? What are you doing there? And then I've got a couple of questions for you.
Cool. NEA is the world's largest venture capital fund. And back then they had never hired pre-MBA analysts before. So I was a guinea pig of the first class. Essentially, all these partners just wanted people to do their work for them. And fast forward, they now NEA I think has like 20 analysts. It's like, wow, that's great to get people to do great work, do all the work for them. NEA. So why did I join NEA? Well, first, why did I go into venture capital? And when I was in equity research, I got into the business of like studying companies and giving buy, sell, neutral ratings on every stock. Right? Like you go to CNBC and there's like someone talking about their stock. Like that wasn't me. I didn't go on TV, but that's the work I did. Yeah, behind that analyst on TV, there's some baby junior OJ who is like crunching numbers. What I realized about my job that I liked was actually understanding the company, the strategy of companies, and the technology of the companies. Like back then that was right when iPhone came out, right? And I made a bad call, by the way. I was like, BlackBerry, RIM, remember Research in Motion? BlackBerry is for consumers. Remember this company called Palm Pilot, remember? Palm is for prosumers. When the iPhone came out, I was like, this is for consumers. Don't worry. Buy more BlackBerry. Buy. Obviously I was wrong, right? But anyways, I love that analysis. What I did not care about was the actual finance. I could do the job, but whether Cisco's going to trade to 35 or 33, I just didn't care. It was almost like too easy. It was like, okay, I can look at a stock chart after a while and be like, okay, it's gonna pop back up.
Humanity's OJ comes out again.
I think so. It's just not for me. It wasn't fulfilling. Like if I made a really great call and I helped a client make a ton of money, I just didn't find that rewarding. So venture sounded interesting because it sounded like it was like, okay, I'm still leveraging some of my analytical background, but I can dig in deep into strategy and technology. So that's why I wanted to venture. And there was a crazy adventure where I got to, work with a great firm. Also, so fortunate, work with some such great managers who empowered me and challenged me. And that's when I got closer to entrepreneurs and founders. And my job there was due diligence for deals that came in. NEA got great deal flow because it was one of the best firms. And the pressure was more on diligence and then working with companies, which is great. And then as I worked more with companies, if I were to fast forward, that's why I ended up working as becoming an operator. I was like, wow, that seems fun. But NEA was fun because it gave me that kind of exposure.
Nice. I read a quote that you had mentioned in a couple places that you saw the fun the operators were having, and you wanted to hop on that side of the coin. So when you were there at NEA, I got two particular things that over your career you've been good at, but since we're on NEA and you've had a ton of exposure to a lot of different types of companies and deals, it could have been one of the places where the seeds were planted for these two things. The first one's around picking horses, picking the right companies that are going to take off, and understanding the process you need to go through in your mind for one, picking that business, and two, evaluating as to whether or not you would want to hop on board. You've done an amazing job with evaluating them for the companies that you've joined, Dropbox and Asana, as an operator, as well as a bunch of businesses you've helped either been a board observer or you've been a board of director on a bunch of different types of companies. So when you're thinking about picking horses, what is the criteria you think about for joining a company and them being, since like you said, people have options that are the best, that it being worthy of one, you looking at it, and two, you hopping on board?
Yeah, it's I absolutely learned that from venture, and as a result of that, I look at everything from a investor lens now. When it comes to picking horses, I think two of the most legendary investors in the Valley, Dick Cranlick was a founder of NEA, and Forest Basket is still a GP there, and just incredibly smart. I mean, he's a guy who basically Tableau was founded. He worked with the early founders in the NEA offices to start Tableau. I asked them, I'm like, hey, what's the secret? What's this like? Because there are some venture investors that are just clearly better than others. What's the secret? I was just amazed. Forrest was just like, Dick was like, find really companies that are going after really large markets. And you're like, okay, duh.
Let me just write that down.
But as I've matured and I looked into different companies and how markets have matured, I can't tell you how many times I've told people on my teams to not, who want to go to some company, give them some VP sales job, and it sounds great, but the category is just not that big, right? And I think that's number one. It's just you have to pick a company that has an exploding market, and most importantly is timing. Is the market about to explode now? Let's take a couple examples. Let's look at Zoom and Slack. Two examples recently. Phenomenal. Zoom is one of the best IPOs of all time. Slack, I mean, incredible IPO. Messaging, right? I don't know. I mean, I remember the days in '95 when we were using ICQ. I don't know if you use ICQ, right? I still remember my ICQ number, right? We were messaging. Slack versus ICQ or later, MS Messenger is honestly not that different. And then there was Skype in the middle, right? So why is this so different? Do I really believe that the UI is so amazing that's the reason? Okay, maybe, but I don't know if that's a $20 billion difference. It's just that somewhere in the B2B world in around 2014, the market tipped. There was a need in the market for more dynamic communications because the pain of email was just too high for that use case. And IT, CIOs started, believing in it. And that's when it tipped. And in that market, within the enterprise messaging market, basically tipped in 2014 to 16, I would say. in those 2 years, the winner, it's a winner's take all market. There's good research that shows that when a category tips, you get a flood of competitors, and then within 2 years, 18 to 24 months, the leader ends up taking, I think 78, something like that, call it 80% market share. But the market, if the market is huge, like you can go to a big market and you'll still be okay, right? Remember there's a company called Jive?
Right.
Remember there's Yammer? Remember there was Chatter? Like there's still those still okay. But if you want to get the $20 billion market cap that Slack got, you have to be the winner during that window when the market's ready to tip. And I would say the same thing about video conferencing. Right? Zoom, like this is nothing new. I mean, that's how my wife and I developed a relationship, is over video conferencing, over instant AOL, another messaging tool. You look, somewhere between 2015 to 17, maybe even later, was when the need really, really tipped, and now you start to see Zoom taking off. And you and I now are doing this podcast, and use it all the time. Same thing with file storage. Dropbox, right, is generating $1.4 billion in recurring revenue for file sharing.
Fastest company to $1 billion for a SaaS business ever. Is that right? ARR.
That's right. And look, they didn't invent file storage. I remember when I first used Yahoo in 1995, I got to upload a file into Yahoo and then download it when I was in the library. It was like life changing. It was amazing. So it's not like new. Cloud storage isn't new. It's just that the market tipped at that point where people were starting to move away from servers. And in 2013 to 14 was when mobile adoption in the enterprise hit a certain rate. And that's when you needed the cloud storage, because you can't, on the mobile, you can't access files anyways. So that's why it tipped. So anyways, number one, you got to pick a huge market. And most importantly, you got to join that market right before the market tips. And so you have to make a call. Right? I joined Asana when people were like, what is this project management thing? I don't know what it is. Like Forrester and Gartner haven't written reports on it yet. But I asked the most progressive CIOs, what's next? They're like, well, I just put in Slack. And now all my work is fragmented, even in more places than before. I need something to pull it back together. So I'm going to look into this project management, work management space. And I'm like, oh, interesting. So I developed this hypothesis that like the capstone of the new modern collaboration stack is going to be something like Asana that pulls things back together, at least for the things that really, really matter to a company. Right. And then, I'm seeing that market, we are in the heart of the race right now, that 18, 24 month window. So that's number one. Number two is obviously is what people generally look for is the technology, right? If this market is going to tip, does this company have the right technology to win? And this is very much a venture thing where you can decide about, you have to make some calls on the architecture, how they built it, what is the, what are customers saying about the product, right? That's when you get some feedback. So the second thing is like, does this company have the right product to win the market? Because I do think, especially in B2B now, SaaS, more and more, it's dictated by the end users and what they use. So you gotta make sure that you're the one that people are gonna pick. And then the last part is, do you have the right team? Does it have the person? Is this company on the right team that you're gonna back? And that's probably the number one thing that, besides the size of the market, that venture capitalists like bet on is the people. Because early stage, you don't really have much of a business yet, or even the product. And I think in terms of picking companies to join, same thing, right? Like you join most people, let's say you join a Series C company, like what is the management team? What are the dynamics? What are when things go south, which always happens, how does that management team work together to solve them? Or is there finger pointing? 90% of the time, it's finger pointing. 90% of the time, sales says marketing to generate enough leads. Well, no, let me start. Customer success and support says sales is closing crappy deals. Sales says, well, what do you expect? Marketing is driving me bad leads. Marketing goes, well, what do you expect? Our product is missing all the stuff. Product goes, well, that's because design is a bottleneck and it's not shipping. We're not shipping fast enough because design's not ready enough. Design's like, well, you know what? Like, it's not my fault. I can't hire enough designers. It's recruiting, right? Recruiting. I mean, it just goes on. And that, I tell you, when I say 9 out of 10, I think it's 9.8 out of 10. So you got to find the critical piece, and I made this mistake myself before Dropbox. I joined a company that I probably shouldn't have. So a lot of people look at the company profile and the executives and where they came from. Oh, this person was at Google for 20 years. Well, you know what? So have like 10,000 other people, right? And you've seen this at LinkedIn. Like, not everyone's a star at LinkedIn, buddy. A lot of stars.
Yep.
Quite a few duds too.
Totally. Okay. I mean, nature of large numbers like that for every one of those businesses.
Totally. Right. Or they haven't seen the right stage that's relevant for your company. Finding the right team that you think you can bank on just to get through the hard times is really, really important. Don't just look at the profile.
Nice. Okay. So we've gotten through NEA right now, and you've gone through, at this point, I believe you jump into Harvard, correct? HBS?
Yeah.
Cool. So take us through the reason you decided to go get your MBA, why Harvard, which may be self-explanatory, and then take us all the way up through your decision to join Dropbox. So through that period, scientific conservation, Harvard, et cetera, up through the point where you're joining Dropbox. And then we'll talk about what you were responsible for there. And I've got a couple questions for that.
Yeah, sure. So I decided when I was at NEA that I wanted to be on the operating side. So I was like, okay, they have all the fun. I didn't understand how much pain they had either, honestly, but I was like, that sure seems fun. And the short answer of why I decided to get in my MBA was like, I was like, okay, well, if I got into a great school, I might as well take a break because I'm going to make this career switch anyways. So I'll just do it. That's literally the logic. And so I applied to, and this was mainly, I remember one of my mentors at NEA, John Sakota, who's a fantastic guy, he was like, I know, I remember now. We were going to go, remember those coming out, the ladders?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
The 100K plus jobs was their thing, right?
Yeah. What happened to them?
They died, and I have no idea. Like it was almost overnight because I remember. I mean, I did a lot of research on ladders for at some point in my career. Anyways, I don't know. They just died. I had no idea.
Okay, so we're going to meet with the ladders in New York. I remember this clearly. This was like right around the recession starting, and John was just like, "You need to apply to business school," and this was like I think October. And like the deadline was coming up in December. And so I was like, all right. Yeah, he convinced me that it would be good. I mean, I might as well. We're going to try it. He's like, hey, John's like, you're probably not going to get in. And that's cool. But why not try? Because getting into business school, certainly getting to HBS is a total crapshoot. It's a total lottery. I got some friends who are way more qualified than I am and didn't get in. And I now know it's for sure a crapshoot. So anyways, I applied, I jammed it, and I only had time to apply to one school. And then that was not the plan, but I just didn't have time because I had to take the GMAT, write the essays, get a recommendation, all that. So I only applied to Harvard, assuming that I didn't get in, and then I got in. So that was why I went.
Stop it. Yeah. Hold on. This is unbelievable. Hold on. So you only applied to Harvard and you got into, why did
it wasn't because I had so much confidence or, it was the only school that I would go to. I was going to apply to like 5, but dang it, man, these essays, they ask you like, yeah, they're right. Like I haven't written these essays in a long time. I had to go back to the humanities, OJ. It took forever. I just didn't have time. Like I think the application was due like January 1 or something. And I remember over Christmas, I was like writing these essays and I was just like, I don't have time for this. So I just applied to 1. I really didn't think I was going to go to business school. And then I got in. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going.
No one can see me losing it right now, like laughing silently while I'm listening to this and not believing it. This is a great story about getting into Harvard Business School. All right, so you're at Harvard. What's the biggest thing you learned there? And then take us through up to you joining Dropbox.
Man. Yeah, so Harvard was great. I mean,
you must have met some really cool, interesting people.
I met some amazing people and people that I consider to be my best friends today. That's where I met the co-founders of Grab. I'm on their board now. That's where I met a lot of great professors. Yeah, look, I think the thing about business school that I got out of it that a lot of people poo-poo business school. They're like, it's expensive, you don't learn anything, it's just networking. I mean, I call bullshit on that. I actually, because I'm a nerd, I like to learn. And so I studied. I'm like, wow, this is interesting. And I'll tell you, like, at that point, I was going through this big clean tech phase in my life. I was really interested in clean tech. I was doing clean tech investments at NEA. I was like part of the environment group at HBS. I was like super active. I thought I was going to build a whole career in clean tech. And now that I'm selling productivity software for the past 7 years, is giving me a different kind of perspective looking back. But I was so into clean tech. And I met some great people through other people who have similar interests. But I'll tell you, like, so my first job was scientific conservation. They basically sell building automation software to help optimize the equipment in commercial buildings to optimize their energy spend. Think of it as HVAC optimization software. I would not have been able to, and I took a sales role coming out of that, coming out of school, which is interesting because very few people go to HBS to come out to be a sales guy. It's pretty rare. And but I sold to real estate developers. And if I did not take a real estate at HBS, I wouldn't know how to speak that lingo, cap rates and TNM, TNI and whatever. I mean, it's a different thing. I learned that from school. And then what's really interesting was then scientific conservation went through a big period of restructuring, and I had to be a big part of that. I took this class called Turnarounds because it's like a new topic where you learn about how to turn around companies, you learn about bankruptcy law, you learn about how to like negotiate with your creditors so you can live to die another day, so to speak. And then I used those skills. I literally looked up my notes on like bankruptcy because I would call up our creditors and I'd be like, hey man, we're about to go under here. I'm going to give you, I know I owe you $2 million. I'm going to give you 2,000 or you can have a shot at bankruptcy court. Anyways, long story short, business school was awesome. Met great people, and I learned a ton, got great exposure, and I actually implement things that I learned. Wow.
So Boston, Beantown, you leave, scientific conservation's next.
Yep.
Join in a sales and partnerships capacity. Every Harvard Business Schooler's dream, joining sales right after that.
That's why you go to HBS.
That's right. #HBS. So what is the biggest thing that you learn at that business, and why'd you join Dropbox?
Well, a lot of my lessons learned around the people and part was what I learned at scientific conservation. It had on paper all the things that most people look for, right? I said, pre-rocket ship, hot industry, people, a team that had looked really strong on paper. That's what I went for. Hypergrowth. I remember Kleiner Perkins, NEA, Excel. Everybody was like, this is the next one. This is the next O-Power. This is the commercial version of O-Power. I'm like, okay. I thought it was the best thing. But you know what? Just didn't have the right team to execute going through the tough times. And that's where I learned. That's honestly the biggest lesson I learned. Met a lot of great people, but that's where I realized like, wow, so much of execution is the people and the chemistry of those people. Yeah. And that's what I learned there. Then why did I go to Dropbox? Honestly, we had to do a big turnaround, right? In scientific conservation. Within a year, we went from 30 people to 180 people. And then I had to play a big part in restructuring it down back to 90 people and then down to 50 people. It was like a year that felt like 10 years. So Dropbox, I showed up, people were in scooters, drinking from coconuts. We've been to the office. It was just a different world. I'm over here like trying to make payroll, literally. There was a day where there's a payroll period where I
and letting people go daily. Let people go daily.
Brutal. I had to one of my biggest. If people ask me like, what's the biggest deal you've done? Whatever. I'll tell you, my biggest deal I've done was I broke my lease, the scientific conservation's lease, with a real estate developer because we had signed this like Embarcadero Bay Bridge View office on a 7-year lease, even though the company was making like zero in revenue. So that tells you something. But thankfully, the one thing that went in our favor was the rental rates have actually gone up in SF, right? Far, far greater than our committed rate of increase in our 7-year lease. So the way I made payroll was I went to the developer and I said, "No, I will break the lease if you give me X amount of money to maybe, what they didn't know was like it's around payroll." It was hilarious. And the negotiation at the end, I think that clinched the deal was like office furniture. I was like, I'll throw in the office furniture.
No, stop it. I always find it mind blowing when in residential, someone rents a place for like, a few grand more a month just because the furniture's included. And that was your deal closer with the developer. That guy's done tons of deals. And this guy closes over the furniture.
I mean, honestly, I probably could have gone anyways. I was actually in my head, I was thinking like, what am I going to, I don't want to pay. I don't want to pay to get rid of the furniture. That was what's going through my head.
Oh, that's a good win-win. All right, so you join Dropbox. There's coconuts, there's cupcakes, there's all of it. So walk us through in like 1 or 2 minutes what you're responsible for and the jumps that you made at Dropbox, and then I've got a few questions around some of your superpowers. Okay.
Yeah. So Dropbox, I went in as one of the first like business generalists. Like I was like, it was just like there wasn't a role. It was really like just do everything. So looked into our payments gateway infrastructure. Looked into capital financing for our data center. I had to help raise capital, fund our data center. I looked into real estate because they're like, oh, now you're a real estate pro from my background. So I had to bring in and try to figure out finding office space. And this was all in the first 3 months. This is crazy. We were moving so fast. And then there was a business called Dropbox for Teams that was starting to grow really, really quickly. And the head of business was just like, our COO was like, can you just take a look at that? Just see like, kind of like basically like do the sales ops work to see what's going on. And that's how I got into it. And then one thing led to another. So, took that role on, started adding some visibility into the business, and then moved into actually managing part of it, and then ended up running a lot of it, growing the North America online inside sales teams to, I don't know, like 70 or so people. And then got the opportunity to co-lead our APAC expansion efforts. So
with Tony, is that right?
With Tony, that's right. And so Tony and I were like, they were like, all right, figure it out. I mean, that was it. Figure out APAC, period. So then we did that. That led to both of us moving out to APAC for a year and a half. Started an Australia office, Japan office. I was going to think about Singapore, but didn't end up doing Singapore. Also looked at Latin America when a new CEO joined. He's like, well, it's not a continent. Someone's going to look at it. And he just put it on our plate. And then did that for a while. And then when I came back to the US, transitioned into the corp dev team. So like thinking about M&A at Dropbox. And then through that experience, I realized I really missed building teams, which is why I went back to the sales world at Asana.
Nice. After hearing your story, and I saw a lot of that firsthand when I was working with teams at Dropbox, and now I'm working with teams at Asana. Now I get that, why you made that jump, or at least why it was the right time in your life and in the missing teams to want to make that jump. Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, so a couple things about Dropbox. There is a theme, and you've done this really interestingly, coming at it from the, let's call it the sales ops angle first, and then jumping into manage these teams, which some of the best operators I know from a sales and marketing perspective have come from the ops side. I look at them as like the yin to my yang. Like they speak a beautiful language, and I want to hear all of it. So as you're doing that, you're building things from scratch, and you are building at one phase at Dropbox, and you go through a lot of different phases of growth in your international expansion playbook. You're also going through phases you've been in before at Asana, and planning for phases that are things you've seen before and things you know a lot about. So let's talk about your international expansion playbook. As you're going through phase by phase, and one, making the decision as to whether or not you should do it in the first place, expanding outside of, let's call it the US for now, into other markets. And then two, once you decide, yes, through that evaluation process, you want to go about doing it, what's your step-by-step process you're going through in order to expand internationally? You can use the Dropbox example or the Asana example, or both if you just want to say, hey, this is what we did then and this is what we did then. But either way, what's your phase by phase and step-by-step approach as you're executing on this expansion playbook?
So I think the first is understanding that international operations is not adding international operations is honestly, from management overhead perspective, it's like the minute you go international, for every new region and office you add is equivalent to adding 2, and the next one you add is like equivalent to adding 3. There's a complexity. The overhead is so much more, and sophistication is so much greater. And not to say it's not worth it, right? Obviously, I do it, but it's something that I think you need to be really, really honest with yourself, with your teams, on like whether and when are you ready for that. So, because honestly, one of the things that I think about is most companies go international too late, right? And so, you want to go fast, but you got to make sure you commit. So step 1, before you commit 100%, what you can do is just do just play the digital game. Localize your product, localize your ads, localize your website. And I would say probably even in that order. So again, it depends on what product you have, right? But if you have a user-facing product, then I think I think the product, it starts with the product, because in many countries you may have 1 or 2 people who are very comfortable with English, but the rest of the team may not be. You're not going to get a good adoption that way. So I think that's important. Localize your product as soon as you feel like you have, as long as you feel like you have enough confidence that it's worth the engineering investment, because it's a big investment. So there's a certain threshold where you're going to start seeing, oh wow, you know what, like whether it's like tickets that come in asking for a language or a community, like you'll get that ask. Then maybe like French and Spanish, the website, that's an obvious one. But what's interesting is like you can get some good lift from just localizing the ads, that you're in Dutch or Japanese, and it points to an English website. You're still going to get some incremental dollars there. So play the digital game, and then at some point, and you have to come up with a framework. And it differs company to company. You don't have to be that scientific, but like, at what point do you feel like you're ready to go open an additional office? And almost always, you'll see English speaking markets adopt first. And UK, Australia, are the next 2, Canada, large markets that, for many reasons, and we're not gonna have enough time to talk about them, but they usually are the next to adopt technologies. And so your next move, almost guaranteed, is going to be somewhere in Europe. And you pick between Dublin, Amsterdam, or London. And we can talk about which one, why, but it's going to be one of those 3, almost guaranteed. So set up your Europe hub. And then, depending on the type of company, you can think about growing from there. So then the most obvious next markets would be France and Germany and in Europe. And so then you got to make that decision on like whether you want to service those markets in whichever hub you've picked, or you go even more local. And I think that depends on the type of company that you have. And then which out of Australia, that makes a ton of sense already. Like the minute you're looking into the UK, if you have the bandwidth, you should look in the UK, Australia as well. I would think that the market demand would be equivalent in terms of timing there. And then Japan. Japan, people forget, it's the 2nd largest IT market in the world. And they're early in their cloud adoption, but for SaaS companies, it's really starting to take off. And so Japan is a market where investing in early can pay off dividends like 3-4 years down the road. Japan is Slack's number 2 market. It's Salesforce's number 2 market. So, but it takes years to build up that market. And so you can start thinking about that. So in order to sequencing, like, I guess I've done it enough now to just know the sequence. Instead of like, when the first time I did this at Dropbox, it was like, okay, how many users do we need to see before we go green light here? How much revenue? How many businesses? How many domains do we want to see? And I don't know. I've traveled so much in the last couple of years. This is the order that I would go in.
You know what's really interesting about that is you mentioned you've looked at the data, and from the data side, it says to do this, this, and this. What you're saying is don't necessarily do the work that everyone else has done. This is in all likelihood the chronology of the markets that you will go into next. And that's Really interesting. Don't redo all the work. Do not reinvent the wheel. I have 2 follow-up questions to that. One is, how do you know whether to hire even more local versus doing it from a regional hub? How do I know whether or not I should sell from Dublin or London or Amsterdam into France, Germany, Spain, Italy, some of the Nordic countries, etc., or hire a local in that particular market? And by that I mean, when do I do it? And I'll ask the other question after that.
Yeah, to me, it all depends on your target audience. Who are you trying to go after, and how? All right. So if you're going after SMBs, this is primarily going to be an inside sales function. You're not showing up. It's not a relationship sale. Then there is so much value in centralizing to the last minute that you can, because you're still trying to figure it out. So Asana is small deals. We start with small teams and then we expand them. And we essentially have a big machine in Dublin. Why? Because the French rep who's learned some new insight, selling to mid-market SMB companies in France, can share with the Nordic rep, and those best practices really it makes it. When you're early in a region, you got to learn quickly, and you got to learn from the field, and that information transfer is so valuable. And then eventually you go the other way. You launch a new product. You got to enable the team. There's a lot of operational overhead to enabling lots of people in the field, versus you just fly into one office and you basically enable a team all at once. So huge advantage to centralizing. However, if your sales cycle and process relies a lot on relationship building, whether it's for bigger deals, whether it's a complex deal that relies on partners, then you need to go in the field. And that's where showing up makes a ton of sense. And what changes is the unit economics of that office, where if you open an office in Paris, now showing up in a mid-market office, opportunity of a 10K or 10K pound deal, normally is not going to justify a flight in, hotels, make it work. But now it's just down the street. I mean, not down the street, but now you can justify making that visit. And absolutely, I would think that increases the conversion rate. So there is benefit there too. But balancing operational overhead, learning earlier, I am a big believer that you should hold off as long as you can. Because once you decentralize, there's no way you're going to centralize again. Well, you can, but it's very painful. You got to shut down offices. I mean, it's really painful. So you want to wait as long as possible.
Nice. Thank you. And then second question is, so let's say, so you're going through this process of massive expansion within Dropbox and Asana, and you're going through different stages of growth. One of the things that you need to constantly think about, which I don't necessarily believe that a large number of heads of sales and heads of marketing are very good at this. One of the things you need to constantly be aware of, and coming from VC, you've got interesting perspective on this, and not a lot of people have gone from VC to operator and done it with the amount of, not only success, but the amount of speed that you've done it. So a head of sales and marketing needs to have the right mindset with planning and execution with unit economics in mind. So how do you make sure that you have the right mindset? What is your mindset when you're thinking about balancing, things like LTV to CAC ratios versus booking and revenue growth rate expectations versus the growing pains of teams and the engagement of those teams? Like, how do you think about incorporating unit economics into your approach? And how do you think about that as a head of sales and marketing?
Oh yeah. So I would say there's a couple things first. In terms of mindset, as a head of, if you're leading sales and marketing, let's say in your team is anywhere in the range, your company is growing at 100%, right? My mindset, and I tell this to all my managers, is that my job is to plan and execute as if we were 12 months from now. My manager's job is to execute and plan as if we were 6 months from now, right? Your ICs are the ones who are executing to quarter. And I think that's something that I always drill into my team and my managers, because most people manage to the quarter. And by the time you manage to a quarter, you've already forgotten about the next one. And you're basically accumulating debt. And I think part of what's challenging and exciting about managing in high growth is how do you balance? You got to balance executing the job at hand, but at the same time, develop a vision of where you need to get to. So if you're a line manager 6 months from now, and you got to do both at the same time. So you ask my leads, they got their quarterly number, that's great, but I almost don't try. I just assume that they're going to hit it. I'm like, just tell me if you're not going to hit it, but I'm assuming you're going to hit it. What are the programmatic things you're building in right now as if you're 6 months from now? Because that is going to take time to build it, right? And then once you build it, boom, now you're ready. My job is 12 months. So right now, right, I'm thinking about what my team needs to be doing this time next year. Because from, my team's getting pretty big now, and it's hard to steer a big ship. And so if I'm optimizing for something for the end of the year, it's not to say I don't do that. I do that, but I also push myself to think longer, because for me and from my angle, what's going to happen in the second half of this year has already been shipped. Like our performance, our unit economics, our, whatever programmatic infrastructure we build is going to be, it's already too late to change that. So I'm thinking really ahead. I think that's important because you mentioned about unit economics. Your unit economics need to change over time. You gotta work with your management team, your finance team to understand what unit economics you need to have this time next year, so that you can slowly migrate there. Otherwise, you're just hiring heads, and eventually you're like, oh, one day you wake up and finance is like, okay, you're gonna get 3 heads next year, but you have to grow revenue by 50%, right? So that's kind of the highest level mindset that I think is really important. Is understand end state first, and work with finance to understand what that looks like. And so I know next year what my unit economics need to be. So now I can start backfilling. And then this is how I do the backfill. So what I do is I ask my teams to now start thinking about not unit economics first, though, strategy. All right. First strategy, then tactics, then numbers. So, for example, my team in Europe, right now it's July, and it's our end of our quarter, quarter this month. Mm-hmm. They're gonna come. The leads are gonna come over to the U.S. and present their strategy for FY20, so whatever next year, basically. So basically, the next 18-month strategy. What do I mean by strategy? Is who's our primary customer? Who are we trying to win over and outserve everybody else? Why? Right? And where are we going to focus? Because you can't go after everything. And when I think about Europe as an example, a microcosm of the world, right? UK is very different than Germany, which is very different than Spain, and very different than the Nordics. So we cannot, if someone comes to me and tells me this is my EMEA blanket strategy, I'm like, that's not a strategy, right? I want you to define what winning looks like in the Nordics, and define what winning looks like in Spain. I don't like Portugal. Not so important to me, right? You can lump it in to that region, Iberia, right, or something. But I think it's important to have a view where you define success. Okay, this is what Germany. This is what I'm trying to accomplish in Germany, right? Align on that first. That's the strategy. Then the tactics. How are you going to do that? Okay, in Germany, we're going to go after this segment hard. All right. Now, what's the tactics? How are we going to do it? What are the resources that we need to make that happen? Right. How much revenue do you think? We won't get the numbers yet, but just tell me, like, how are you going to get it? How are you going to make it done? Right. For example, at Asana, we think in Germany there's a big digital transformation push, more so than any other country that we see. Right. And there's historical reasons why that is, but it is moving. So to us, it makes sense that the tactic is to really build field. And that's why we're going to build field in Munich and not Berlin, because Munich, it has a lot more of your more iconic traditional companies. Berlin's a tech hub, but we're going after the strategy in Germany for field is to go after digital transformation opportunities. So, that's the piece. I would say a lot of companies make the mistake and they go tactics first. They go, oh, okay, this is what we're doing right now. And so next year we're going to do this. And you don't actually understand what it ladders up to. And you may not end up actually, your tactics may not actually end up hitting the strategy that you actually really want. You got your strategy down on a region by region basis. You got your tactics, right? Then you got to figure out numbers. What is the target that you'd want to get, right? Because remember, we've already defined success region by region. Now we're going to deploy resources and see what do you need for that. How much field marketing do you need? Oh, I need to sponsor this conference. I need like 2 sales engineers, 5 AEs, 3 SDRs, and whatever. Okay, great, right? And then I can come in, and I know my unit economics 12 months from now, and I can see in overall, like, where are we over, where are we under, where can we push, right? Because some regions I'm okay with having poor unit economics because we're just starting. The Munich office is going to have terrible unit economics for the first year. I'm okay with that, right? But I have a portfolio view, and I can kind of make sure it happens. And what happens is, like, sometime later this half, I'll start aggregating all these different regions and strategies, and I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm way over. And this always happens. This always happens. Everybody wants like 50 heads, you know, and then basically we have to iterate then. Then we go back and we prioritize. And we say, hey, these are the unit economics we need to hit. We are this over. And so let's stack rank our priorities. And then we'll cut it, right? So maybe we'll cut, you know, an office here, or maybe we'll cut some resources over here. That may impact top line. And so we just iterate, and you go through a couple cycles.
Wow. That is a great, comprehensive step-by-step answer. All right. So we've gone to your phases that you went through with Dropbox. I've got one more major topic to cover, and it's a good segue after you talk about Asana. So why make the move to Asana, and tell us what you're up to there, up through now. And then I've got one final topic to talk about. It's a bit meaty, but it's a good one.
Okay. Exciting. Like cliffhanger. Asana is easy, right? I mean, I told you my criteria already. So I made the call that this space is going to blow up. It's going to explode. It's going to be huge. It's going to attract a lot of competitors. It's going to attract a lot of interest. And I still don't know exactly what the category is being called. I mean, Forrester is now calling it collaborative work management. 451 is calling it enterprise work management. Gartner keeps cold calling us. I'm not sure where, but there is heat. Yeah. I think that the technology is differentiated for many ways. I love the product. Our users love the product, and then the team. Ultimately, the team. I've never worked with a team that is as committed to co-creation as Asana, and just great culture. It starts from the top. Our founders really care about how we work as important as the product itself and the market. And so I feel like we are going to be tested in battle, and we will win in the battle. So that's the short version of why Asana. And I feel very strongly about all three of those dimensions. Yeah. Okay.
No, go ahead. So then let's talk about what you're responsible for there, and maybe like 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll hop in.
Okay. So I run our sales teams and our BD practice. So on the sales side, we have kind of 3 lines of business. We have a big self-serve business. This is not what you think about traditionally when you think about sales. A lot of this is like working with product and marketing to make sure your conversion funnel is really strong. Think of this as like Netflix. Netflix, like knowing which movies to pump in front of your face so you buy them, or Amazon, right? So a lot of this is like growth marketing and conversion marketing. And that's a practice that is a strong one for Asana. We have another one called online sales, which is layers on top of self-service. And this is high velocity sales that takes advantage of our freemium model. And then we have enterprise sales that is more traditional. And their approach is really around driving big expansions in companies that we've already landed. And then BD there's 2 components. There's a component around channel, which is how do we develop an ecosystem of revenue partners who can help us. And let me think. And then strategic partners. So how do we partner with build alliances with folks like Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Adobe, kind of more software partners.
Okay, this is great. And you guys have just grown. It's a massive rocket ship, and got enough cash, and you guys have all the right criteria for everything you mentioned earlier for how you're evaluating. Let's start with the topic going from freemium to enterprise, and knowing when to do that, and we'll talk about how to do that. So you mentioned, and I was listening to a couple of the podcasts you've done in the past, and there was a really interesting structure you laid out about going from freemium to enterprise and the steps you take in order to do that. One of the first steps you talked about in thinking about freemium was the right audience and the right product category. Can you explain those two concepts and how people should think about that?
Yeah, the most freemium products start this way. They come out of Y Combinator. Something didn't work. A week before demo day, they pivot and they're like figuring something that works. They copy and paste in the Stripe snippet. They get everybody else in the same Y Combinator class to buy. It's like this thing, and then and then the demo goes well, and everyone's like, "Wow, look at the LTV to CAC. It's amazing." But usually that's what happens, right? And it's a product first view based on an insight of a potential perceived pain. Now, 8 out of 10 of these don't make it out of the gate. Like the pain is obviously not big enough to warrant more funding and such. But 2 out of 10 are great, and they really hit on. I mean, these are smart founders, a lot of them, and they find a pain that's actually pretty big. And they put it on the website. You can do a free trial, or you can download for free. It's pretty easy, and you start getting data on people are starting to sign up, and the word of mouth effect is something that is extremely. You have to have lived in Silicon Valley to understand what that means, and this is something that I think different globally. But boy, technology that come out of Silicon Valley, that word of mouth effect is very strong. And so if you got something, it will go viral pretty quickly. And you can start seeing people starting to sign up. And then usually it's for one particular pain that you think you're solving. But the reality is the market is going to find your solution actually solves a number of different kinds of problems that you don't even know about. And so this is where I think it's super interesting. Once you get to a certain scale, right? Let's say you get into single digit millions in ACV, or maybe in terms of customers, I don't know. Once you get into like maybe over 1,000, let's call it, you get over 1,000 customers, you have enough information now, right, to just look across and just do an analysis of like, hey, what kinds of companies are these? And it'll take like 2 hours, okay? Because a lot of these will be like SMBs, and you can't just like run data, and match and stuff. But you can start inferring what type of companies are getting value from your product, and to solve what pain. That second part is very, very important. A lot of companies kind of miss that. But if you're in a freemium model, just looking at which company uses you doesn't tell you anything, because usually it's a small team solving a small pain within a bigger company. So you got to pick up the phone or do a survey, and you understand. At some point, you're like, okay, it makes sense. I have some hypotheses on where I have great product market fit, and it's a big market, and I have a differentiated way to continue to double down on this pain and do it in a differentiated way. Mm-hmm. Then I would start adding humans to the process. So the first piece I love is always inbound sales, or inbound chat, or inbound support, whatever. Basically, get some humans in there to test your hypotheses. Right, you got some data now. You kind of know, hey, maybe government is where the sweet spot is in solving this type of thing. Okay, great. So then hire 1 or 2 inbound salespeople, and their job is to do a couple things. One, for the companies that you've identified to be kind of like in the middle of your bullseye, call them up, build a relationship, and you'll see that there's probably some good expansion opportunity right away. Second, because the word of mouth dynamic should be pretty strong, right? If it's strong, if it's not strong, you got to go back to the well, right, and go back to the whiteboard. But if it is strong, you should be getting a reasonable amount of traffic on the website, right? It's not going to be like thousands of leads every day, but maybe like 10 a week in the beginning, right? You want to man them. You're going to take advantage of each one of them, validate your hypotheses. Obviously, try to close the deal as well. But that's, to me, revenue is secondary. And I do see this in a lot of management. They hire like one salesperson, and they're like, "Here's your quota," and that's, if that is your primary objective for that person, you're not going to get the insights that you really want. And the insights are way more valuable. So like your first couple of salespeople, I think like you really drive the people to get you the insights of like, hey, where's the sweet spot? What kind of pain are we solving, right? What are the additional pains that we could solve? That is more valuable than whatever 20K MRR that you're going to get. So you do that. And at a certain point, you start getting, you're going to have to improve. Mainly you take that feedback, work with product to really improve or expand the problem that you're solving and make it excellent, right? All right, then that should bring in more people. And at some point, you can start building out the team more, and then you can start segmenting more. And eventually, you can start going outbound. And outbound, I would put in quotes. What does outbound mean? Does it mean like you're just like traditional outbound and LinkedIn outbound? I mean, you are the expert here, so, right? This is like, okay, I'm going to create opportunities. You figure out your persona. You know who you're targeting. You get them on the phone. Although people don't do phones anymore. People don't even do emails now. I don't even know. Like now people are like sending books around. I don't know. But you find a way to get in there. You prospect. Yeah, that is traditional outbound. I think freemium outbound, you have something kind of in between, whereby you can go after companies that you already have some traction, and let's say they're healthier, right? Those are essentially your leads for an enterprise play. And I'm a big believer that if you can't even drive big expansion deals where you've already landed, maybe it could be small land, but if you can't even drive some big expansion there, you got no business to go, let's call it true outbound, right? So you know what? Go outbound in accounts that you already have landed to some degree. And that motion, by the way, is not easy, right? You're at Nike, you're trying to get into Nike, and you got like 50 people, super fans, love Asana, and they want to use and they're really happy, and you're like, okay, well, how do I navigate that organization, right? It's hard, but so there's a craft, there's a different art and science to how you go about doing that. You got to get that motion down first. I love the process that goes through my mind.
Nice, awesome. And so let's say that you get to that phase, and you're going to start building out your sales engine. You're going to start building out your team of humans. What are the first few phases you go through and steps you take in order to do that?
So the way I think about it is you got to first understand what are the selling motions that you want to build. And I think this depends company by company. But like for me now, there's a selling motion. It's not really selling like with humans, but like just growth optimizations, right? How does your website convert? That is a motion that you're going to have to get good at. So I organize a team around that. I have a team called online sales, which basically like uses a lot of data process automation to intelligently know which are the teams that likely came in through a self-serve funnel that have a high propensity to close or expand. That's another selling motion. That's very different. We talked about that enterprise expansion play. How do you go after companies where you've already landed and then you want to expand? That's another motion. So I think depending on the company, you got to go, this is pretty, I think, more first principles, right? You got to understand like which are the motions that you really, really need to develop. And you basically organize and start developing these teams to start building out those practices. And then as you do that, you can kind of reallocate resources depending on which ones are doing better and not. But I think the critical piece here is you need to be able to articulate and identify what is the motion that you want to build.
Yeah, good one. And then last one, and then we'll wrap. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate it, OJ. Thank you. Now, you just talked a little bit about your org and how you structure it, and you kind of just went through a few different motions that almost map very closely to the same org that you were just talking about. So within each one of the self-serve, online sales, enterprise sales, BD, and strategic partnerships, can you give us one or two things that you absolutely have to nail, or one or two best practices you absolutely have to think about if you're going to nail each one of those? Maybe we could start with self-serve first.
Sure. Self-serve, number one thing, you got to get cross-functional alignment. This is, you talk to many growth teams. This is where it falls behind. This goes back to my earlier comment about you got to find a team that actually works as a team. Because that self-serve business touches upstream acquisitions. I mean, you can even go more upstream with branding. So brand to acquisitions to conversion, a funnel to the actual adoption of a product in the first 30 days. That's the self-serve business. And then eventually, and also retention. So it touches everything. And so if you don't have a cross-functional alignment, you can forget about it. Literally forget about it. Don't even waste time, because most companies are so small where you really need the whole full funnel to work together. Otherwise, you're not going to move the needle. So that's number one in the self-serve business. You got to get that alignment. You got to get that commitment, and that's hard. Sales, you need to spend before you even build it. You got to spend a significant amount of time and energy to align with all the other functions around the company. That, hey, do you all agree this is an important practice to build? And if so, this is how we're going to build it and how we're going to work together. Otherwise, not worth it. That is
self-serve.
That is self-serve. Online sale. So this is kind of high velocity inside sales that sits on top of self-service. A lot of this is depending on whether you have the systems and operations and data science to support that kind of velocity, right? Like our online sales teams, each person closes above $1 million per person. That's a tremendous kind of when we talk about LTV back. That is, can't beat that.
That's really good.
It's real good. But you can only do that if you have and they're going after SMB mid-market, right? You can only do that if you have really good automation, data science that kind of picks out which are the leads and contacts that you should invest your time in and get a bigger deal, right? Each rep, let's say each rep closes about 20 deals a month, right? And so it's not a ton of deals. You got to really, really make them count to retire that kind of money. And so making sure you have invested in the ops and the systems and the tooling to make that efficiency work is something that I think most companies underestimate. I continually underestimate, actually. I thought I'm ahead of the game, and then a month later I'm like, I'm still behind. So having that platform, thinking about that business as a platform, super important. Enterprise, for freemium businesses, I think the most important thing to tease out as a leader is understanding how much of the revenue is actually driven by the reps versus how much revenue probably would have come in anyways.
That's
a lot of companies have this problem where the enterprise reps essentially just piggyback and put their name tied to an organic expansion that likely would have happened anyways. Now, so that's where I think people need to spend some time thinking about, because that's not scalable.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Business development, strategic partnerships. You've done this at multiple businesses and extremely well. What are some of the best practices when you're thinking about doing that?
So with partnerships, you got to ask, what's your North Star? Are you trying to use partnerships to drive awareness, in which that's much more around co-marketing and branding? Are you trying to use partnerships to drive leads, right? Are you trying to leverage a partnership program to drive to kind of address product gaps to get into a new vertical? Are you trying to use partnerships to just drive more user engagement? These are the questions that you got to answer first as a company, because I think where a lot of partnership programs fail is partnerships go out and try to find partnerships. And then they bring it back into the company, and people are like, there's no resourcing for it. Marketing doesn't want to support it. Product doesn't want to build it, because people aren't aligned on what you're trying to build, what you're trying to solve for. And that's kind of the age-old things about partnerships. Like, partnership folks generally want to do deals. But do those deals map and ladder up to a important initiative? If it's not a top initiative in a company, don't even bother, right? And so I would say that's the most important thing when you think about partnerships of any kind, whether it's channel, whether it's strategic, same thing.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you appreciated and enjoyed the episode, go ahead and make a comment on the post for the episode on LinkedIn. If you love the Naberhood podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time, go get it.